Thank you. Hello, I'm Jen Vanek, Director of Digital Learning and Research at the EdTech Center at World Ed. Thank you for joining us for our fifth collaborative webinar between ProLiteracy and the EdTech Center at World Ed. If this is news to you, we have been working on delivering a webinar to you every fourth Friday. So do continue to check in and join us in this work. I'm joined today, obviously, you know, Todd Evans, who was just talking, and then also from ProLiteracy, Patty Celadon. I'm also by my fellow EdTech Center at World Ed co-host, Ebony Vandross, who is going to go over some of the engagement features for this Zoom meeting. We can go today. Ebony, you want to talk through the slide?
Sure. Sorry about that. Hey, everyone. Thanks for coming. If you're unfamiliar with Zoom, you can find the control panel at the bottom of your screen. To access the chat, please click on the chat icon on that control panel. And when you make any comments, please select all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see the comments. To have, you can use the hand raise feature in the control panel if you have some sort of question or tech related issue, and that will get my attention in case I don't see your comment in the chat. And for all content related questions or questions about the material being presented, please use the Q&A feature. If you have any other problems, please email me at the email address below. Thank you.
That's great. And then give you a few reminders. As always, we're going to be recording this as we started. All the materials that we talk about, the presentation slides and a transcript will be after the webinar, along with a certificate for the spent here. So look for that. Todd's going to send that probably later today or Monday. And then now onto the agenda. We're talking about a topic today that is really useful for programs, no matter the content or size. We're going to be talking about learning circles today. We're joined by Ricqui Brooks from St. Louis Public Library. And Todd is going to talk about some of this work that he's done too. And then also my colleague from the EdTech Central, Ed Sharma. After Ricqui presents, then we'll have a short pause for some questions to Ricqui. And then Priyanka will present and we'll have time for a few questions. If there's any time, we'll have some more facilitated Q&A supported by Patty and Todd. So with that, I think let's turn this over to Todd and Ricqui to start talking about their work with Lewis.
Great. Thank you, Jen. And what I'm going to talk about is just kind of an overview of what learning circles are. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about a project that ProLiteracy sponsored involving learning circles. And then Ricqui's going to talk about her participation in that project and her implementation of learning circles. So for those of you who are not familiar with learning circles, fundamentally what it is just an informal group of adults or people kind of organized around learning about a single topic or a goal. And kind of the difference between that and a more formal classroom is that there's an online component. That online feature is really serves the kind of the role of the teacher. So most of the time it's a group of people kind of getting together. Everybody's taking an online class, maybe learning to play guitar, maybe researching citizenship or whatever it is, but or learning to read or speak English. So really the online course serves as the teacher, and then there's a facilitator that serves to kind of keep people on track, ask questions, facilitate discussion, and kind of facilitate the learning. They're very student-centered, obviously, because the people gathered there all have a kind of shared interest or goal. They take place at a predetermined time or place, and for like a predetermined amount of time. So in that way, it's kind of like attending a class. And that's really one of the, if you think about the benefits, that's really one of the benefits, is that it brings some structure and responsibility to online learning. If any of you have ever signed up to take an online course, kind of sitting at home taking it, especially if it was free, you may have found yourself, oh, it's been a while since I've been into the course. I haven't been keeping up with my work, that sort of thing. So that structure and that idea of going to a place, taking this online course, but going to a place where I'm there with other people, I'm engaged in the learning, I'm engaged with other people, asking questions, that structure can really help people with that online learning format. Just like a regular, and I apologize, I'm working my way from the bottom up. Uh, there's an opportunity to learn from other students, to network with other students, and you kind of get that camaraderie and support that you would get from learning with a group of people. Kind of the nice things that can be about any topic. All you need to run a learning circle is a facilitator. So it doesn't require necessarily a trained teacher or a content expert. That role is really provided by the online course. So the facilitator, it requires a little less training, which allows you to be able to implement them in a lot of different context or a lot of different environments. So libraries wind up using these a lot, where they may not have a trained teacher, excuse me, but they do have a librarian who can perform that facilitation role, and it's a great way to offer courses to the community. So in our project, was sponsored by Pitney Bowes, excuse me, we had a grant from Pitney Bowes to develop a series of 4 workforce online courses for adult education students. You can see the courses here and some of the content that they covered. And the second part of this grant was to take these courses and fund libraries in implementing these courses in a learning circle environment. And so we identified 4 libraries. Ricky's was one of them. The idea was that they would invite people from the community, adults from the community, to come in over a 4 or 6 week period, kind of scheduled to meet once or twice a week. They would be in that library. They would take the courses together. Somebody would facilitate that learning, a library staff person. And this would be a good way for adults to build their workforce skills. And just a little bit about the kind of Pitney Bowes courses. As I said, they were designed directly, specifically for students. So the navigation on them is real simple. They are really easy to access. You can take them on a computer, a phone, a tablet. They're very interactive. They have lots of resources. And you can, I'm going to go back one slide. You can find those courses, and most importantly, they are free. You can find them at this website, proliteracyednet.org/workforce. And now I'm going to turn things over to Ricqui and let her tell you about her experience in setting up the Learning Circle.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Todd, and hello, everyone. So as Todd mentioned, the St. Louis County Library was selected as one of the libraries for the Job Skills for All project. And initially, yes, we planned to offer our learning circles in person. We had 3 branches selected and also 1 correctional facility. But when the pandemic hit, we had to shift and change direction. So instead, we realized that we would have to offer this program virtually, and that location would then place participants in their home environment, which can sometimes provide some distractions like pets that walk across the computer screen. So there were some things we did have to prepare for, considering again that our setting changed. So we initially had planned to have our learning circles occur in our computer lab or classroom setting, which would have allowed for a lot of discussion and conversation to come naturally. However, we ended up with a virtual program using the platform Zoom. And I can say one positive about using the Zoom platform is because it is a job skills course, and Zoom is used a lot of times now in the workforce, it has allowed for us to give our participants some training on how to use Zoom. So it still has been quite beneficial, even though it was not our original platform. And the unfortunate thing was when we were planning to do our learning circles in person, we had planned for them to occur in the evening because we have a lot of library programs that are offered during the daytime. And so space is very limited during the day. So the positive thing about offering our learning circles virtually is that we were able to offer them not only in the evening, but also during the daytime. And that has made it much more convenient for our participants to attend. The initial plan was for each of our learning circles to take no more than about 4 to 5 weeks, depending on the topic we were covering. However, because there is so much information in the online course offered by ProLiteracy and Pitney both, we had to make sure that we provided enough time for that information to be received by participants. We know that it's hard to sit in the classroom for some people to focus for more than an hour to an hour and a half. And so for the virtual program, we decided to keep the duration to an hour and a half once a week, but we extended it from 5 weeks to 9 weeks just to make sure we gave all of our participants enough time to digest all of the information. And we also had to reduce the number of participants that were going to attend our learning circles. In person, we would have been at a maximum capacity of 15 individuals. However, with the virtual learning circle, in order to address the needs and questions of individuals, we wanted to cap it somewhere around 7 to 8 people because we know that there is a digital literacy divide and some individuals may need a little bit more assistance than others. And the other thing we realized with virtual learning that we would have to address that digital literacy divide in that some people may not have internet service or a computer at home. And the great thing is our library was able to offer Chromebooks and hotspot bundles for checkout for individuals to participate. And as you will see on our next slide, this is an example of the agenda that students see at the beginning of every class. So at the beginning of each class, we provide an agenda just so they understand what we'll be doing for that day. And the initial class, we have them do introductions and an icebreaker using the poll feature of Zoom. And this is really just to get them comfortable with the control panel in Zoom and just to get them comfortable with communicating via a computer. Some people are not engaged in the matter that they would show themselves on camera, and it's okay. We just simply ask for individuals to unmute because we do want them to have the similar experience of being in a group setting where there's true peer learning. So the great thing about using Zoom in this manner with the Learning Circle is it offers the feature of being able to share your screen. And so I can always walk a participant through how to locate the course, how to navigate the course, and even how to create their account on ProLiteracy. And then if they're having any issues, they can then share their screen with us so that we can really help them troubleshoot if they're having any major issues. One thing that we found that has really helped, considering we had to go from a 5-week period to a 9-week period, is offering incentives. And so we do offer attendance incentives every 3 weeks just to keep people engaged in the program and so that they maintain good attendance so they're really not missing out on any information. The wonderful thing about learning circles is that is an opportunity for people to have a shared experience in gaining knowledge. But virtually, what has happened is it has really allowed for individuals to be extra comfortable in sharing because they are in the comfort of their home. So we have found that our virtual learning circles have worked very well, and we're excited to offer more. And I will answer any questions at this point.
Oh, let me unmute. Great, Ricqui, thank you. And we'll take one or two questions specifically for Ricqui, and then we will switch over to Priyanka. And I know, Ricqui, I have just a general question for you. So you talked about some of the benefits of moving that learning circle into a virtual environment. So I'm just curious, kind of when COVID is over, do you think you will go back to your plans to have it face to face? Do you think you may continue to do it virtually or both?
Oh, thanks. Absolutely, Todd. I plan to do both. I do plan to offer it in person and virtually, just so that we are making it convenient for as many people as possible.
Perfect. And we have one other question from Cassandra, who asks, what kind of incentives do you offer? So do you offer any incentives for folks to sign up and take and complete?
Sure. So the way I have the incentive set up is, if it's a participant attends the first 3 weeks of class, and they don't miss any time, they will receive the first time a Starbucks gift card. And then if they attend the next 3 weeks, weeks 4 through 6, they receive a Panera gift card. And then at the end of the 9 weeks, all students will receive a gift card. And then I do a raffle, and your name is entered into the raffle for every time that you attended class, and that's a larger amount gift card.
Okay, perfect, perfect. So I think what we're going to do, we've got a couple more questions, but I think we're going to turn things over to Priyanka and let her talk about her experience, and then we'll open it up for a couple of questions for her, and then kind of some larger questions for all the panelists. Priyanka, do you want me to continue to move the slides, or do you want to take over?
No, I think that's okay. I'll just say next slide, and then you can move the slide over.
Perfect.
Thank you so much, Todd. And it's lovely to hear about your Learning Circle experience, Ricqui. I'm Priyanka Sharma at World Education. And I'm also joined here by Kathleen. Kathleen O'Connell has joined me. She has been working with me on this project for a couple of years as well. So to get us started, we started our Learning Circle adventure, I want to say about 4 years ago now, when we sort of first heard about this idea being used in libraries for just taking online courses together by, as Todd mentioned, whoever wanted to sort of learn together in an informal environment. And we were intrigued by it, wanted to see how it could work in a more formal setting, like an adult ed program. And so we started a pilot with 5 programs in the New England area around Massachusetts, and had lots of success and lots of lessons learned from that project. And in 2021, like, we are up until, I don't know, more than 500 learners served, with 25 programs, having done it multiple times and growing. So we have sort of managed to really take this idea of a learning circle and really contextualize it, and sort of worked out some of the kinks based on our learning from implementing it in different contexts. And I'll give you some of those examples in a little bit. And next slide, please. And of course, our project has been funded by Dollar General Literacy Foundation all through the years, and we're grateful for their support. So the way we wanted to differentiate our learning circle from learning circles that we first heard about through peer-to-peer university was having a focus on it. The focus here being English language learning. And the sort of problem we ventured upon addressing is this idea of there not being enough classes available for learners to enroll in person. Remember, this was back in 2017 when people actually went to in-person classes. And so we targeted programs that had a long wait lists. So this was a way to engage learners that were not getting into a regularly scheduled class for access reasons or numbers reasons. Just the timing of the class perhaps didn't work, and find out a way for them to engage in a learning environment that was smaller sized, that used online content, so that the burden of instruction was lifted off of a facilitator. And that's the piece that I want to talk about a little bit as well, as we get into the weeds a little bit. But then what I feel really pulls the idea of a learning circle out is this idea that Ricqui mentioned before, is the learner-centric component, the peer learning, peer sharing component that makes it a rich environment for learning for learners. And that's sort of what we have seen year after year of evaluations and focus group with learners and instructors and programs, is the model sort of stands alone as a way of really getting students to participate and take ownership of their learning. Next slide, please. So as we sort of got started, we wanted to identify some idea of like what would be the learning content for learning circles. These are some of the things we used. We wanted to, the other piece that we wanted to stay true to is reducing the burden on an instructor to pull together a learning circle and think about that role more of a learning facilitator. A facilitator that drives people to content, and people are able to access the content and then learn on their own and talk about it in a learning circle setting. And these are some of the solutions we used. Most of them are free, but not all of them. And as programs got better at using this, we also ventured into using learning apps in a learning circle context and had pretty good success. So just to reiterate what Ricqui mentioned before, is the way our learning circles have been running up until very recently, is that, picture a time period of 8 to 12 weeks with about 8 to 10 learners each, where people are meeting once a week for about 90 minutes to 2 hours, getting together. There's some activities that are planned that don't involve technology. And then everybody sort of used to break up and go to the learning platform and learn, and then have like 50 minutes there and then come back and talk about it or do another activity together. I don't want to say forcing them to talk, but that was the idea, is to really spur discussion, sometimes by force, so that specifically for English language learners, they had more confidence in speaking, and help making sure that everybody gets a turn to speak also gives them more confidence. So that's sort of how our learning circles have run to much success. Next slide. So one of the things that, like a little spanner in our machine here, was when we had to go remote. So as you can imagine, there's a component of learning circles, which is by design integrates technology into learning. So even when we used to have learning circles in person, there was somebody from the program who was sort of assisting facilitator, or the facilitator sort of helping the learners in the first couple of sessions to get them set up online, to have like a Burlington English login password if that's what they were using, or setting up on USA Learn. So there was already some sort of a digital onboarding learning ramp involved. But that ramp just got steeper when they had to move to remote, because then they have to kind of solve for device access, internet access, as well as other issues that come up when learners are at a distance, especially English language learners, like when you have to like really get them to really feel part of the group. And but we have been pretty successful at going remote. The programs have tweaked their services a little bit, where they're just like Ricqui mentioned, a lot of programs have been giving out devices. If not, they're helping learners get online with their phones helping them set up their Zoom so that they're available for class when it's time. And then also thinking about how then there is either like a teacher helper or somebody else online for the first couple of Zoom classes for some programs who are able to, figure that out in terms of resources to help learners get comfortable with the technology. And one of the questions I'm going to preempt that comes up a lot is, well, gee, all of the classes are online and in programs. And if learning circles are also online, well, what is the difference? There are a couple of differences. I think the one thing is that from a pedagogical perspective and from something that really makes learning circles an enriching experience, the learning content is delivered through an online platform and not necessarily the teacher. The teacher is the facilitator, and that shift we have been able to carry through that thread from the in-person learning circle to a virtual context in which the instructor does take a back seat, learners take more responsibility for their learning. And some programs have been using breakout rooms for spaces for learners to learn. Others are having learners do the online content access part ahead of the learning circle so that they have something to talk about. So there's been slight pivots and adjustments and tweaks as we have moved on. And we're still learning. We're still in a very active phase of learning. We probably have more than 10 learning circles actively going on right now in different states and different programs. And we're learning, documenting, and soon disseminating those learnings. Next slide, please. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that by design, we wanted the learning circles to be implemented in different contexts. So we've had multiple libraries part of it with similar experiences to Ricqui, so I'm not going to delve into that a little bit. We've had some literacy volunteer programs who we have trained and helped with our resources, the implementation resources we have, to make sure that they have the right sort of training to recruit the right volunteers for this purpose, to be facilitators of learning circles, as well as figure out what support they need to be successful facilitators. As part of our project, we do have an active community of practice that all these programs are a part of, so that there's like some level of hand-holding, but also professional learning that happens. And lessons are shared, and we learn about best practices as well. We've had some unions have a lot of success in doing English language learning, some contextualized English language courses as well. And most of the programs we work with are community-based adult education programs, ESL programs that are able to either use their teachers as facilitators, because this is by design. This model is something that doesn't require as much of the intensity of prep that they would require to deliver instruction in a formal class. It's more about facilitating learning, and then we do have a training framework and some resource framework for them to rely on to reduce sort of like their time spent on running learning circles, while other programs have been successfully using volunteers for this purpose. Kathleen, am I missing something here? Do you want to add something before I go on to the impact on learners?
No, I think you've covered it.
Okay, perfect. So next slide, please. So the impact on learners, this is what really drives us and keeps it very inspiring and exciting after 4 years. Because every time we're talking to learners, like the number one thing, pretty much across the board, regardless of what kind of program they're a part of and what level of English language learner they are, hands down, everybody talks about how being part of a learning circle gave them confidence to speak, or to speak up, but then also speak. So they're just more confident speakers than they were before, something that we're measuring through our, through qualitative ways. And we also, by design, have programs kind of, well, we used to ask programs to do pre and post testing or rely on the testing they're doing with the learners to see if there's any difference in their learning gains. As you can imagine, they're not really doing 40 hours of instruction through learning circles, so it's not a best way to determine that, but we do see some uptick with learners as they use learning circles to learn English. The one other thing that really came up, apart from their confidence in using technology to log in, log out, figure out how to change their password if there's a need for it, the other thing that really comes out is their sense of attachment to the program, because they're relating to the program in a different way, but then also a strong sense of community within the classroom with the facilitator, just because of the sheer nature of it being peer driven and peer centric. And as part of sort of our training and overall guidance as we ask programs to implement these learning circles is always having like a communication plan, because what can happen is that if you're just meeting for a brief amount of time for once a week, possibly there could be drop off where learners don't feel part of this light touch, for example, and don't connect to other learners or the facilitator, and just don't see the point of it, and might as well wait for when a spot does open up in a regular classroom. So to work towards that, we always make sure that they have some communications plan set, that there's always a conversation about the next class, the next learning circle. A lot of programs have found success using WhatsApp to, have like learner groups set up there to talk about their learning between classes. And we have multiple testimonials of programs talking about how the bonds that have formed in learning circles have carried on with these learner groups as they hop from other classes, the regular classes. And it also ends up being, a higher retention than usual for the learners who are participating in these learning circles. Next slide, please. So having worked on this for multiple years with a fantastic cadre of facilitators and teachers and program directors, we have pulled together some tips. Most of these tips come from, all the interviews we have done. We had one rock star facilitator do a blog for how to host learning circles and tips. And I can add the blog link in the chat later, but the idea would be what you see on your screen here is this idea of like establishing virtual classroom norms. One of the things that is critical is letting folks know what the difference is between this and a normal class, like where they are on the hook more. They need to engage more, and rather than be passive learners. So I think that's sort of like part of that culture setting. And that also translates to the way we encourage programs to advertise and recruit learners for learning circles. And what we have found, which is fascinating to me, is that programs say, well, gee, like half of my learners just want to continue on this learning circle, even though they have access to a regular class, just because they like the interactive, engaging aspect of this. The other thing, which I sort of talked about before, is orienting learners to the platform, like being clear what you're using, helping them logging in, logging out, troubleshooting so that they're able to learn independently on whatever platform or whatever learning content website or app they're using. The learners' home environments, I think Ricqui mentioned about sort of like their norms and figuring out that people should have their audio on. So just making sure that those things are front and center in the way they are getting ready to be part of a learning circle, so things don't come as a surprise. Some of our, one of our programs has been able to really use this idea of virtual learning circles in a new way, where they're using a lot of external speakers to come in and talk. And you know, sometimes like somebody from the health department coming in and dropping in on a Zoom learning circle and talking to learners about it. So I think there's very interesting ways of using it in a remote context, which would be harder to pull off in an in-person context. The other piece, leadership opportunities, another piece that we've seen build programs build out a lot is several programs have moved facilitation roles from just the teacher instructional facilitator to learners. So if the teacher is able to facilitate for the first couple of times, do some role playing, explain the role, and then the facilitator role is shifted to a student who is interested and willing to do that, and they have really enjoyed doing that. And then just sort of like goes around the room as to who the other facilitator is. So, and they decide what the opening activity would be and some other pieces that come with it, therefore building their confidence and providing a leadership opportunity. And the peer support. I mean, that's another critical piece that really differentiates it from a regular class. Like where we're talking about peer support, learners relying on each other for help, each other, you know, like reveling in each other's success in making movement forward in terms of their learning. One program Kathleen and I worked with, they really got into sending text to this person's partner because the person's partner was English speaking and this partner always wanted to send him texts. And so like, that's what they would do for like a you know, like a part of their learning circle for that many weeks. And it was wonderful. Like people were like typing, checking spelling, translating, like really building connection with each other, and rich learning experience as well as fun. Learning should be fun. So that's another piece that we really encourage. Next slide. So the other piece of the final, I think the final couple of slides I have here are the implementation resources we have on our website, which these programs are able to take advantage of, which all of you can take advantage of. We'll put in some of the URLs in the chat. So we have a implementation guide, which is not really updated for running virtual learning circles because that was from the project that ended pre-COVID. But we're working on that version of the implementation guide this year, and it'll be out. And then it also has like the planning tips that I talked about. It has these really cool lesson plans that Kathleen has put together that really lay out the 7 weeks, for example, that you would have the learning circle. It really does like a show run through as to what is going to happen. Something that is critical, especially if you're getting volunteers to run a learning circle. So then a lot of your work is done for you. And there's some digital skills self-assessment sheets that can be used, something that I think some programs have turned into like Google Forms to send out to learners so they have a sense of like where digital skills lie and how much support they would need to onboard and start the learning circle online. And some other training materials too. Next slide, please. And this one just markets the implementation guide, which you can access. Next slide. This, this is very interesting. So one of the other resources we have in the implementation guide, and there's a link, like a Google Doc link to it, is this idea of first day slides. This is something that a program pulled together when we first got started 4 years ago. More for like level setting, like basically introducing the idea of learning circles to learners in the first meeting. Interestingly, you know how it is, like when you learn these lessons, you know, as teachers, as program folks, we're like, yeah, we got this, we designed it perfectly, it's going to be great. And then when we first started learning circles, we saw this horrible pattern where there were like 20 people signed up for 2 learning circles and everybody dropped off after the first week, first day. Like 5 people showed up the next time. And we were so not happy, pretty sad. We're like, what's going on? We need to fix this. And this was the fix that programs came up with that really made a difference. is really talking, because basically what happened was when learners came to this learning circle thinking it's going to be just another class, even though it had been advertised as something different, as soon as the teacher took like a back seat and became the facilitator, there was a lot of confusion, and learners didn't feel like they were in the right place, and they would rather wait to get a spot in a regular class. So these slides really go through the motions of introducing the idea in a very simple way of what a learning circle is, how is this going to be different from a regular class, and I would encourage you to check it out from our implementation guide as a way of understanding yourself, getting buy-in from your program folks, but then also presenting it to learners in a very sort of simple yet easy to understand way. Next slide. And this is what a lesson plan looks like. It's really detailed, completely designed so that you can hand it off to a volunteer and they can review it and make it their own, and really take it away from there. So you, as a program person or as a teacher who's supporting a volunteer, doesn't have to do a lot of planning. A lot of that work has been done for you, and you're welcome to change the content as you wish as well. That might be the end of my slides. Thank you. We continue to stay excited about this project all these years later. And this is Kathleen in my email, and we would love to hear from you.
Thank you, Priyanka, and great information. We've gotten a lot of questions from folks. I actually have a question, and then we'll start going through these. So you have kind of a unique situation where I'm guessing COVID hit possibly in the middle of your learning circles. So what was the student reaction from moving from a face-to-face learning circle to a virtual learning circle? Did you see any drop off? Did you get any feedback about which environment students preferred, or what they kind of liked about one and liked about the other?
Yeah. So to answer your question, COVID hit between our two programs. So basically there were no active learning circles going on at the time COVID hit. What happened was we had a lot of our programs drop off. Programs are like, we cannot do this in a virtual way. There's no way our learners will ever get online. You know how things were in March and April. It's like, we're shut down. Everything is going to open in June. Like, nobody's doing anything online. And then as we sort of worked with the programs, by August, we had worked with the programs, convinced a lot of them, if they were not actually planning on doing a distance learning piece, to really think about learning circles in a different way. But the hardest thing was to really think about the value of something like a learning circle in a virtual context versus a classroom that happened, versus a class that happened online. And those tweaks are still something that we're working on, so that the programs are able to think about it differently and not take the meat of the practice, which is this peer-centric aspect of it, and not just turn into like a regular class.
Okay, that makes sense. We have some questions, and now I'm going to start kind of opening it up to everyone. And just to kind of let everyone know is that Priyanka and Ricqui have agreed to stick around and make sure everybody's questions get answered. So when we get close to the top of the hour, I'm going to remind everyone that we're about to wrap up to get your questions in. We'll talk about upcoming webinars. And then if you want to stick around, we'll cut off the questions. But if you want to stick around to hear the answers, we'll be recording all of them. And if you have to leave, you'll get the answers to all of those questions in the recording. So our first one, and this is to both of you, have either of you used learning circles with adult basic education students? And I'm going to assume we're talking about like lower level students as opposed to higher level students. I'll expand on that a little bit, either low-level native English speakers or ESL. How did that process work? Were there any issues around finding content or getting people connected to the, you know, the Zoom chats or anything like that?
Kathleen, you want to address that for English language learners?
Yeah, sure. Hi, this is Kathleen. So I also saw there was a question about the level of the learners. So our program has really been geared towards English language learners. And we have found that some of the groups had very, very mixed circles. And it could be tricky, but in some of them, they would have a buddy who would sort of help them through. And some of those learners, some of the lower level learners, beginning speakers, actually said that they learned so much by being in it, by, just sort of listening to their peers and kind of forcing themselves to speak more. In terms of adult basic ed, to my knowledge, in our programs, that has not happened. I know that one of the pilot programs has spawned off a whole bunch of different kinds of learning circles, GED, high set, so sort of the higher level. So they really encourage the learners to think up what learning circles would work, and what learning circles they would like to see happen. So as I would say, they've spawned off a lot of different learning circles. But in terms of sort of low level adult basic ed, not to my knowledge, but somebody else may have a different answer.
Yeah, but successfully for English language learners, low-level English language learners. The other thing I wanted to add to Kathleen's response is that several programs are using it for sort of their career exploration, career pathway type things, so that they're able to really share online content and create learning circles dovetailed with the career pathways class to extend learning, basically.
Excellent. And Ricqui, that was really what the kind of the direction of your learning circles. Did you find that you had kind of a mixed level groups, multi-level groups participating in yours?
Absolutely. So our initial thought is that we would be serving mostly low literate and non-native English speakers, but it has truly run the gamut from individuals that are retired who are trying to get back into the workforce, and even those who are currently working in a managerial position. The great thing about having a mixture of individuals represented in the learning circle is that because it's a peer learning model, those individuals who do have more work experience are there to kind of help answer questions and guide those who are low literate or are non-native English speakers. And it's really a great thing to see them almost mentor each other.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. We have a question, and Priyanka, you talked a little bit about like the traditional 40 hours and the testing for gains and things like that. And we have a question about for programs that are funded by WIOA grants. Are you guys funded by WIOA grants? Are you kind of have to follow those reporting mechanisms? And the question is, can you see being able to use learning circles in WIOA grant funded programs? Were you able to do pre and post tests, report enrollments and learning outcomes to like the national reporting system?
So we sort of leave that aspect to the programs. The programs are funded a little bit through our grant to support the implementation at the start, with us designing it for sustainability, so they're able to really absorb it by other means, not WIOA, just because I think they can definitely, as part of our funders requirement, we do have programs do pre and post assessment. but that's more for our own measurable outcomes for the project and not necessarily to be used sort of for their state or federal funding. But some programs, depending on what kind of program they are able to do it not through the WIOA funding, but sometimes state funding and sometimes additional funding.
Yeah.
Great.
Can I add something to that?
Absolutely.
Some programs have ended up using them to sort of onboard students to the program. So say, for instance, your program that uses Burlington English, for example. So during the learning circle, people are learning how to use it. So then once they get to the regular classes, it's an easy move for them. So we can sort of act in tandem with sort of the, larger program.
Okay. Ricqui, what about your program? Were you responsible for reporting kind of gains to the national reporting system, or?
No, we are not. So another learning circle that we're about to start is the high school equivalency learning circle, and we don't receive any WIOA funding, so we don't have to do any NRS reporting. However, I would suggest that if you are looking to do some type of adult education learning circle that does require NRS reporting, that you just make sure that the course content you select offers pre and post tests. The great thing about the courses on pro literacy, they do have the option to do a pre and post test with their course for Job Skills for All. But if you're choosing to do something for adult basic education, just make sure that it does track their testing scores. And also, it'd probably be great if you had something that would track their attendance, because you would probably need to report that as well.
Mm-hmm. And I know in some of the other webinars we've done, people have used asking people to type in on the chat, like at the top of every hour, that sort of thing, as ways of reporting attendance. And I think that kind of varies from state to state what they accept. We've got another question. I think this will go out to everybody. It says, when participants are asked to watch content, do you ask them to watch content in advance so that they come to the learning circle prepared, or do you ask them to watch the content during the learning circle? Have you found that one approach is more successful than the other?
Ricqui, do you want to go first?
Oh, I can, sure. I'll be really quick. I can just say that for our learning circle, we have them do all of the content, 90% of it during the learning circle. So instead of doing breakout rooms, since we only have about 7 participants at a time, we just have everyone mute themselves. There's a timer for them to do the content. And then when time is up, everyone unmutes and they come back and we have time to do group discussion and group activities. I prefer for them to do it during the time that we're meeting, just so that the information is fresh in their mind. And it's not something that they watched last week and then they forgot what the content was. And very rarely they will have homework that they have to do. But as much as possible, I try to have them do all of their course content during the learning circle.
I think it's similar for us as well. It used to be everything done right during a learning circle in a more in-person context, which with some emphasis given on, hey, if you want to extend your learning, here are some additional resources that you can do on your own time, and just come back and we'll learn together again next week. In a virtual context, I feel like it's for some programs, it's similar to what Ricqui mentioned. For some others, they're sometimes using websites, external websites to do some career skills work or some other pieces, or vocabulary stuff, or using Newzilla, and that's sometimes done in breakout rooms, and then they do come back together and talk about that. Kathleen, do you want to add something there?
Yeah, it has been sort of a mix. A few of the learning circles have asked people to do, to do the work at home or some of the work at home. And, as as you can imagine, that's, some people do it and some people don't. So they very much sort of make the content part of the learning circle something that everybody can learn from. It isn't the same thing that people learn, we're working on for homework, but they can still learn from it. And we also had one learning circle where it was tough for students. The students were all using their phones, and they were finding it tough to do much work on their phones prior to the learning circle. And so they started, they had a visitor come over Zoom from the local health agency to talk about COVID and all, all sorts of things related to this. This was earlier in the fall. And then from that, the learners really wanted a speaker program. So they've since had about six different speakers. So it's been sort of a, quote unquote, live learning experience over Zoom. It's worked really well.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. So we're getting close to the top of the hour. So I want to take a quick break from questions, remind everyone to get your questions in before the top of the hour, and to give Pro Literacy and Jen from the EdTech Center to just do some quick wrap ups, and then we'll come back and to Priyanka and Ricqui and Kathleen and have them finish answering your questions. So a little bit about our webinar series. It's every fourth Friday, 1 p.m. Eastern. Our next one will be on March 26th, and we have a speaker lined up. She's going to be talking about just all the different Google tools that she uses in her distance education environment. And a lot of the things that she does with them are really interesting and kind of fun. I learned a lot just in talking to her, recruiting her, and but they're not things that specifically rely on Google. So kind of all of the platforms that you might be associated with, even if you're not using a lot of Google stuff, I think you'll find a lot of stuff that's really useful. And then we also at Pro Literacy have a regular series of webinars that we offer called Distance Learning Ideas from the Field, and you can find that on our website at proliteracy.org/webinars. Jen, do you want to talk about the other webinars that you guys do?
Sure, we have Second Friday webinars, and they're linked to from our page Tips for Distance Learning. And you can find the calendar and the full archive of recordings from all our past webinars. And Ebony is chatting links as we go.
Fantastic. And as I said, our next webinar coming up on March 26th, and this is where you can register for it. Actually, give us till Monday so I can reroute that link to the new registration page. And then our upcoming webinars, we actually have a series called Fundraising in a Pandemic. We had our kickoff webinar last week, and we've got a recording to that on our webpage. And then you'll see kind of coming up, there are some webinars about hosting virtual fundraising events, as well as kind of managing a drip campaign to maintain your donor contact through through the pandemic. And Jen, I'll let you talk about the webinars you have coming up.
Sure. Our next distance ed strategy session, our second Friday, is going to focus on IET from a distance. We have two programs from Washington, D.C. who are doing really interesting things in order to keep the hands-on demonstration part of their work rolling while they have social distancing requirements, and how they're using video to do that. The other presentation will be from a program who's doing really interesting things with Google Sheets in order to teach practical math skills for a construction trades IET program that they run. Ebony has also chatted the link to our course, Transforming Distance Education, which is free and self-paced micro-learning units to help cover all aspects of setting up or scaling up a distance learning, remote live instruction, or blended learning program. So I hope you'll check out those resources. Thanks, Todd.
All right. And we will, for those of you who need to leave, thank you for coming. We're going to cut off questions now, but for those of you who want to stick around and just hear the answers to the questions, you're welcome to do so. If you can't stay, we'll be sending out a recording on Monday and some other follow-up resources. And so you'll be able to hear the responses then. And I'm going to go back to our nicely designed question slide and ask our next one. So, Ricqui, you and Priyanka kind of both gave a little bit of a description of how you have the participants working through the exercises together. Any other kind of activities you've done or kind of interesting ways you facilitated that virtual online together work where people are doing online content? And I'll let Ricqui start and then Priyanka follow up.
Absolutely. So the one great thing about the way the Job Skills for All course is set up is it does allow for us to kind of break it up and include some other activities in between. So for example, when we are working on their tailoring the resume portion of the course where they're working on drafting their resume, I have them do this game, this activity together where they act as if they're a hiring manager and they have 6 seconds to review sample resumes to put themselves in the position of a hiring manager. And doing those group activities in between the modules in the course really kind of breaks things up. And so it's not like they're just simply doing an online course in a vacuum, but they have an opportunity to come out and do an activity. And then I also, as Priyanka mentioned, provide them with other external links that really provide for them to have a continuing education. So even if they don't have time to do it during the learning circle, they can do it over the next week before our next meeting, or they can do it at their leisure once our learning circle session is over.
Great. And Priyanka or Kathleen?
Sure, I'll go first, and then Kathleen, I'm sure, has multiple ideas. One of the things that we had learners do, and I think this worked better, or actually we have evidence of it working in person, is where learners, when they were in accessing content together in small cohorts in 1 or 2, sometimes reading through materials on Newsela or some other platform like that, and then presenting on it to the rest of the group, saying, "Oh, we read this article together, and this is like these were the 3 main points of it," like, so summarizing it and then presenting it and taking questions for like comprehension. So that worked really well. I don't know, Kathleen, if you've seen evidence of it working well, or people trying it in a virtual setting, or any other ideas you have.
Yeah, sure. So we had a writing group recently, and so the learners often they were working through a platform. It's a free platform available through the library system. So they came across similar questions. So what they would do in their group is read their writing to each other, sometimes pairing off into breakout rooms and sort of helping each other through the editing process, kind of like thinking through their ideas, and then coming back again the following week, with a more polished draft. So that seemed to work really well. Breakout rooms are, one of the miracles of Zoom that seem to be saving the day, I think, in many cases.
Yeah. Here's a question that's come up from a few different people is, do you find that there's a risk of participants getting distracted, just kind of being in the Zoom environment? Is it hard to get them to pay attention, especially kind of if the learning circle goes on for longer than an hour and a half?
If I can respond to that, I feel like that's probably one of the powers of Learning Circle that differentiates it from a regular classroom, is that there's so much learner participation expected, required, that that one is a hard one to do. Like you have to be present at all times because you're always part of something that's going on. Either it's discussion or doing online content, either with a partner or on your own, and then reporting back on it. And that's one of the reasons why even when it was in person, we constantly heard from programs, oh, it's all 90 minutes is too tight. Can we have it go longer, or 2 hours or 2 hours plus? And we always ask them to not do that, so that we'll lose learners in terms of their focus, because it's such an active engagement environment that 90 minutes is plenty for somebody to sort of stay engaged and participate.
Great. Ricqui, anything to add to that?
I completely agree wholeheartedly with Priyanka. I think that is a blessing of the Learning Circle, is that it is only once a week. And so it's not like a classroom setting where you're going to class maybe 2 to 3 times a week. So when individuals are logging in, they're trying to actually accomplish something in that hour and a half. And the really interesting thing I found is that it's almost like an opportunity or a getaway for a lot of the participants, because they are dealing with either working from home or dealing with homeschooling children. And so when we have that hour and a half to focus on themselves and to really build up their skills, they are focused. So we really haven't had any issues with distractions from the home environments.
Great, great. And we have another question kind of about content, and I'll just preface it by saying, Ricqui and Priyanka, I know you both have shared slides that had some content sources on them, and so we will include links to all of those resources in the webinar summary that we send out on Monday. But have you found any issues around finding content? Is it hard to find content? Where do you look? Have you developed it yourself? Have you found particular developers that you like more than others?
So for us, from a from a program implementation perspective, but more so sustainability perspective, because we're very much interested in, once programs start learning circles, is for them to be able to sustain it beyond when they sort of stop working with us through this funded project. And so our focus from the very start is either working with them as to if they have already existing licenses or content that they use, or they're encouraging them and talking to them about what else is out there that's free. So not a coincidence that a lot of our programs that we work with use USA Learns. Kathleen does training for them to make sure that they understand the features and what's available and the app and how you structure an online class and everything. So we try to be platform agnostic by design.
Okay. And Ricqui, anything to add to that?
I agree completely. Again, for us, the blessing is that we are able to use the Job Skills for All courses through ProLiteracy, which are free, and the creation of their accounts are free for participants. It's an easy access and very user-friendly. And the other thing is, as a library, we have other platforms that offer courses that are completely free. So I would say that, that's number one for us. Like Priyanka said, is that we're providing them with content that they can use beyond the Learning Circle that won't accrue any costs for them. So check your local libraries. They also offer a lot of good content. And then the other resource I would suggest would be peer-to-peer university. They also offer a lot of good free content.
Excellent. So here's I think a pretty quick question. For the high-set learning circles or the GED learning circles, are all the learners at the same reading or math levels? Are you kind of grouping people that way?
So that was my challenge. We haven't started that Learning Circle yet. We are still recruiting, but that was my initial challenge when determining which software we would use for our course content. because yeah, we're going to run into there being this differentiated levels in each group. And so the way that I've decided to address that is we're going to allow individuals that want to get their high school equivalency to join the learning circle, no matter what their level is. And then for those who may be on similar levels, what we'll do is eventually start creating breakout rooms where they may be working on the same part of the course content. So if there are 3 or 4 people that are working on percents, we'll have, a breakout room for just percents. And then if there are others who are working on supplemental angles, we'll have breakout rooms for those students. So I think that's going to be the great thing about using Zoom is that it will allow for us to place people who are in different levels in breakout rooms.
And we also had more than one program use a solution that they were already had a license for, or we had funding to cover their license. So they used, I think they used Learning Upgrade, where the instructors were able to, help learners learn at their pace and report on that.
Okay. So we have you just mentioned, or one of you mentioned breakout rooms. Just a quick question. Are you able to monitor group interactions while students are working on content in the breakout room? So you split them up. Do you have an opportunity to kind of bounce back and forth to answer questions they may have or things like that?
Yes, we've had facilitators report that is either sometimes they have 2 folks, but they are bouncing back and forth between breakout rooms to keep track of what's going on, mostly to make sure that somebody's not stuck somewhere or is like lost for instructions.
Okay. I've got about 3 more questions, I think, and then we'll be done. So this one is for Ricqui, but I think Priyanka, you guys also mentioned something about this. Ricqui, how do you arrange the Chromebook loan? Like, how does that process work?
Sure. So the great thing is it's not in my hands. That's one of the duties I don't have. So we have Chromebooks and hotspot bundles that are a part of our general catalog. So our patrons are able to either call our customer connect line or visit our website, and they can request it just as they would any other media from the library.
Okay. And Priyanka, Kathleen, did you guys mention kind of technology loaning programs as well?
I think that's pretty much up to the programs, but we do know that several programs have, because of COVID, sometimes in some cases due to their own funds, saving on other classroom costs and kind of bought Chromebooks or tablets. They have been loaning them out. They typically use 1 or 2 different kinds of like basic contracts to get the tablets out to people. Some of them have hotspot bundles while others don't have it. But we have seen a lot of programs, majority of the programs, just saying that the learners, there's some level of self-selection that happens as well, is that learners signing up for learning circles typically do use their phones or have access to a laptop as well.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. That makes sense. So we have a question. I find it an interesting one. It says, our group is planning to do ESL in another country. Will a learning circle work for this purpose? Thoughts?
So Kathleen and I work for World Education. We do have projects all over the world, and we're actively advising them to implement learning circles. Yesterday we were talking about implementing them in Zimbabwe. So yes, and I think that's when you access our implementation guide, you'll kind of see the frame can be the same. It could be used in a public health clinic somewhere in the middle of nowhere to learn about, to do health literacy versus, like using an online content, depending on the data, speed, availability, cost. There's a lot of free online resources out there that can be deployed to implement it internationally. If you do it, we would love to talk to you more about it.
Fantastic. And then our last question. So I know Ricqui talked about having a grant from Pro Literacy to help her implement learning circles in her library. And Priyanka, you've talked about your learning circles being sponsored by Dollar General. So I'm going to kind of broaden these two questions out a little bit. Do folks need to, like, how helpful is it to have funding to be able to implement these learning circles? What kind of budget would a program need to be able to implement a learning circle? And what do you use that money for if a lot of the materials you kind of are utilizing are free? So I'll start with Priyanka and then go with Ricqui.
That's an excellent question. We are designing the programs to sustain it. So that also means that they don't have a lot of time. I'm sorry, they don't have a lot of money from Dollar General to pay for a teacher full time, or, you know, like to run a learning circle. The reason we have money for them for their participation in the project is more for how difficult we make their lives by saying, hey, you didn't put in that pre-test, or we want that post-test, so that we can sort of submit it to our funder, tracking attendance, which they would do a lot of times. But I think a lot of times it is the time-intensive aspect of reporting back to us to help us evaluate the success of the program, doing focus groups with them, with their learners, and taking their time that they wouldn't actually would have to give to us if they were not part of our project. So I think our intention is to cover that extra administrative load that they have because of their participation in the project, and not necessarily to underwrite the implementation and running of a learning circle. And that's something we make sort of clear at the very outset. I hope that's helpful. And,
Yeah.
and you know, at some level, probably I want to say last year when we had, when we really wanted to try out learning circles with apps, most of the apps were paid. And so we did have some money that we got from the funder to pay for some licenses for them to use specific apps like CellEd and others. But that's about it.
I agree with Priyanka in that, you know, it depends on what your goal is with your learning circle, if you even need a budget. Because there is so much free content out there, if your goal is simply just to host learning circles, you don't really need much of a budget. You can hit the ground running. However, if you're going to do something like a high school equivalency learning circle, and you don't have access to a software or course, you would need to have funding for that purpose. And the other thing is, if you plan on using any printed items and you don't have, you know, anywhere to print handouts for individuals, you may need funding for that. And then lastly, we use our funding for incentives for our Job Skills for All learning circle. And what we will be doing with the funding for our HiSET learning circle is providing test vouchers. So when the participants are ready to take the HiSET exam, we'll be providing them with vouchers so that they don't have to pay for the test out of pocket.
Oh, that's a great idea. That's a great idea. And then let me just kind of agree with what Priyanka said, and Ricqui was gracious enough to not talk about how much of a pain we've been for her in asking her to do reporting and things like that. But that really is kind of our pro literacy's approach as well, was kind of recognizing that the content is free, but really the demands that we're making on people piloting learning circles so that we can report back and kind of spread what they did to others is really about paying them for their time and responsiveness to our questions. I will say, and this will kind of wrap things up, that pro literacy has a lot of grant opportunities. We have a mobile learning fund that programs can apply for to help them purchase various online learning systems. Some of them were mentioned here, Learning Upgrade and some things like that. So I'll include some of that grant information in the summary that goes out to people. And with that, I will take this opportunity to wrap up to say thank you again to Ricqui and Priyanka for a wonderful webinar on learning circles and how to implement them and their experiences. You guys have been great panelists. I'll say thank you to everyone who stuck around to listen to all of the responses and for attending. And hopefully we will see you in March. Thank you. Have a great day and have a great weekend.